Dear friends, today I am going to discuss with you something about the critical thinking, which is a very, very important point proposed by the new education policy, which is called NEP 2020. NEP 2020 talks about creativity and critical thinking to encourage logical decision making and innovation as one of the most important principles. They call it key principles of the NEP. Now, as it is suggested, as it is the principle, one of the principles of the new education policy, I recall a quotation by Connelly. He says, "He who asks a question may be a fool for 5 minutes, but he who never asks a question remain a fool forever." And we know Henry Ford says, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably why so few people engage in it. Both these quotations are showing the importance of critical thinking. Thinking has to be there, and critical thinking has to be there much more. And when we talk about this critical thinking, it is associated with creativity and innovation in the new education policy. Now, when we look at Ignatian Pedagogy (IPP), a practical approach which was introduced by then Father General in 1993, Father Colvin Beck, he says the critical thinking must be a paramount important for Jesuit education, and critical thinking must be there in all our teaching and learning endeavors. Recognizing the diverse settings of Jesuit schools, Ignatian Pedagogy put forth a flexible approach based on broad principles from the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And in that sense, it talks about 5 major elements of education. Number 1 is, it is mainly aimed at teachers. It recommends a 5-dimension style of teaching. Number 1 is possessing an astute understanding of the context in which teaching takes place. Number 1 is that the context. Every teacher must understand the context of the student from where he or she comes to the classroom. And once the context is understood, if you have an astute understanding of the context, then we move towards creating an experience that stretch the intellectual and imagination of students. Because all of us have an experience based on the context, and if that context is taken into consideration and experience is understood, then we slowly move towards the third realm, which is called fostering an ongoing habit of reflection to go deeper into any experience. We must make our children understand the experience and reflect over it. And based on that reflection, we must create an experience for the students to have an action. That is, we need to create proper opportunities to put the values and skills acquired into action, so that some positive transformation in the learner, and also not only in the learner, it's also the teacher, and also the world around, the society at large must happen. This action is to be in the service of one another, and that's why we in our schools aimed at making men and women for others. And based on this action, we need to engage in rich, multifaceted assessment of teaching and learning, coupled with the willingness to change and modify as appropriate. And that is why the new education policy somewhat talks about the assessment also, which is a 360-degree holistic assessment system is proposed in the commission, etc. So very seriously, the new education policy takes the elements of IPP, even though it does not say much, but in the key principles, at least we can visibly see these 5 elements which I taught. Now, when we look at the critical thinking, we must ask a question: what is actually critical thinking, and what prevents us from having critical thinking in education? Critical thinking is actually the ability of a pupil, a student, to develop a healthy skepticism toward any information presented as fact. Do not simply gulp and believe what is coming from outside through social media, through other media, through newspaper, to television. We need to sift it and understand the fact from the information that is provided to us. And that means there is a lot of unfamiliar ideas will come, opinions will come, and varied situations will be there, and the students must be made capable of sifting what is right from what is not so right. And we need to make capable of our children and examine the things, and based on their conviction they should speak out. Now, what are the things that prevents from critical thinking? Number one is, it can be a problem for all of us, that is, if you start accepting blindly everything, blindly accepting in somebody's talk or the values statements and so on, or somebody's argument, political, etc. And also political manipulation. People say this is right and this is, like the political parties' manifestos, etc. Simply there is no accountability at the end. So that critical thinking has to be developed. TV, for example, if you look at every day, the amount of advertisement in the newspapers and television sets, etc., saying that this product is the best. And if you look at the advertisements, all the companies will be saying the same thing. And children must be able to look at these things critically by having, for example, if it is newspaper, many newspapers should be analyzed together, not only following one newspaper. If we follow only one newspaper, we will be brainwashed in that sense. So that is why critical thinking has to be. Critical thinking also includes, I think, in my opinion, is a media education. Media literacy is also part of this critical thinking. In our schools, it has to be there. And when you look at the critical thinkers in the world, we see they distinguish between fact and opinion. They ask questions, make detailed observations, uncover assumptions, and define their terms, and make assertions based on sound logic and solid evidences. They will not simply blindly say this is what. No, they will analyze, they will critically look at things, and then weigh it and make an opinion. And it has a lot of benefits. When we exercise this critical thinking, as the education policy says, it is very, very important to have that in the students. For example, in the public and personal life, it helps them. Avoiding all kinds of fake news, for example. Today the social media is flooded with the fake news. We need to educate our children to sift it, what is good and what is bad. And also the critical thinking, as the policy says, it talks about encourage logical decision making and innovation. Creativity and innovation will come only the person start thinking. And therefore, we need to teach the children to make decisions after verified information. A scientific temperament has to be created. And it also, they say, an unexamined life is not worth living, Socrates says. The same thing is unexamined assumptions are, for example, like prejudices against a community, against a group of people, against a country, against a language, and so on, against women, for example, or a particular community or caste. It's all can be very, very dangerous. and prejudices against somebody, dogmas, of the religious dogmas, which says we need to question, we need to understand after proper questioning. And also, a well-informed citizens will be a critical thinker. For the country, it is very much needed. That's why the new education policy suggests, I feel so. Because unless and until we have critical thinking as part of our education system, we cannot create critically thinking people, logical people. And unless and until we have our citizens capable of logically thinking, you cannot have a country for the future. And therefore, a lot of benefits are there, what I said like that. And also we have in the workplace, for example, you can become a better problem solver because you don't simply jump into and emotionally follow. You will have reflections, discernment and problem solver. And also when you hear something, you can better analyze and you can place before the people varied options. It will be a very, very objective way of looking at. And once you are a critical thinker, you can communicate also well, communicate a position logically, and you will be able to make very good decisions. And what are the things that stopping us today in India, for example, stopping us from having a critical thinking is, for example, lack of relevant information. Suppose all media is bombarding with fake news or unnecessary discussions or so much of debate in the name of irrelevant issues or silly issues, then definitely we will have the problem of we will not get to the relevant information. And many people know they may not have the reading skills. If they have a poor reading skills, they will not be able to come out with the proper thinking. And a lot of biases, as I already told, prejudices there. Superstition, for example, in our country, terribly superstitious people, then you will not have critical thinking as part of your process. We have also a lot of pressure, peer pressure. Suppose a community is pressurized by the administration or the police or the decision makers, the powerful class, etc. We cannot have critical thinking. And people who do not so much of clinging on, like the Pharisees and Sadducees those days of Jesus' time, they did not want to have a change, so they refused to change. In the name of Sabbath, they hold everything they held on to. So you cannot change. And there is no rationalization. Now people simply believe, for example, sentimental, emotional issues are taking precedence against the realities and that which is relevant to people. So no rationalization happens. And a lot of stereotypes. All women are like that, all Dalits are like that, Christians are like that, Muslims are like that, Hindus like that, Americans are like that, all Tamils and Biharis are like this and so on. We make all kinds of stereotyping, which is very, very harmful. And we also have wishful thinking, it will happen, it is because of this. And a lot of unwanted assumptions people have. All these things are preventing us from having a thinking skill or a critical thinking. We need to create ourselves better in that sense of observations in the class, asking questions, and we need to take risks. We must ask the children to take risks. You must define a problem and ask them various choices. There is a model which we have in the scientific model, which is called a red model in critically thinking. To think critically, think red. What is a red? Red means recognizing assumptions. That is a R stands for recognizing assumptions. E stands for evaluate arguments. Evaluate arguments. So E stands for evaluating arguments, and D stands for draw conclusions. So to think critically, think red. We need to think red in that sense. Red means recognize assumptions, evaluate arguments, draw conclusions. And therefore, we need to promote certain strategies in our schools. Number one is open-ended assignments. Don't give conclusions. Because the purpose of education, as scholars say, educationists will say, creating curiosity. And therefore, open-ended assignments should be given. Case studies must be given so that they will find out the answers to this, the problems. And also a lot of reflections must be given in the classroom. I see, how many of our teachers are giving reflections in the classroom based on the lessons they teach, whichever subject it is, and reflections with values. And also discussions must be allowed. Let the children also ask questions. They have their own perspectives, so we can clarify them and rectify them, correct them, and so on. So a lot of questioning must be encouraged in our classroom. So critical thinking, which is a part of the new education policy, will not happen in vacuum unless you really make an atmosphere of freedom, an atmosphere of the questioning, and an atmosphere of flexibility and changes. So a few questions, for example, based on something, if you teach a story or something like that, then you must ask questions. What do you mean by? Or an issue, take it, what do you mean by? And ask them, how do you come to that conclusion? Your own opinion. What is the source of your information? Where did you get it? Is it genuine? Where is the data? Simply don't say in the air something. What assumptions led you to have that conclusion? What are the implications if you are wrong? Suppose you say a wrong thing. What will be the implication? Make the children to reflect. And also, why do you make such inferences? For example, about something, why do you make such a conclusion? Inference. This is what? Is another one more consistent with that idea? Ask the children to look for various other options of that. Why is it so significant for you? What are the alternative explanations for this phenomenon? Make the children to discuss. And you must ask directly questions in the classroom. Ask for clarification from them. Solicit opposing views and posting questions that cannot be answered with a yes or no answer on one line. We must have a genuine atmosphere created for children to have this wonderful experience of critical thinking in our classroom. I think once we have such an atmosphere in our classroom, an atmosphere of flexibility, atmosphere open, and an atmosphere that makes children so comfortable to go for more things about an issue or a thing or a problem, I'm sure they will get better thinking, better conclusions based on the rational thinking, and that will lead them to have, as the policy says, to encourage logical decision making and also of creativity and innovation. I think that is what we need in our classroom. As the policy says, I think, as also the Jesuit education rightly points out, it is time for us to stress on this aspect in our classrooms. Teachers must be critically thinking, and in turn they have to make their children critically thinking in the classroom. And these key principles in the new education policy is so vital for us to build up a thinking community for the future, so that the country will develop, and as it is the vision says, it will become a superpower. If critical thinking atmosphere is not created around us, I think all this in the document what is written may not come true. Let's all work for that, to make our children creative thinkers, so that they will be more creative, innovative, and logically thinking people to solve the problems they are faced with and our society faced with. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you.